Hello and welcome back to another video. My name is CJ, the Populist New Yorker, and today we're going to be looking at a 2024 hypothetical presidential election matchup between Republican Senator Josh Hawley and Democratic Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. So this is obviously going to be highly speculative because we don't have any indicators for the 2024 election yet. We haven't had the 2022 midterms. However, I think it would be interesting to entertain this possible matchup even this early in the race. So, of course, all the states I've filled out are already safe states that either candidate will win by 12 points or more. One of the states that went by less than that margin that I've put on this list is the state of South Carolina. South Carolina tends to be one of those states that in 2008, Obama lost it by around 10. Then Romney won it by 14. Then we go back down. Then it's 14 again with Donald Trump in 2016, and it went back down to 11. So I think South Carolina will trend back more Republican, and the reason I say that is because it's not growing as fast as these other North Carolina or Georgia, these other southern states. But we'll jump right into the actual prediction here. That was the only caveat I wanted to mention off the bat. Also, the state of Iowa. I do think Iowa will continue to trend pretty red, especially since the margin that Iowa went in the 2020 election was basically the same as the 2016 election. A little bit less so, but I think the state overall, considering its majority white working class, is likely to trend more Republican. So like always, we're going to start from west to east here with the state of Nevada. So in the 2020 election, Nevada actually got redder than in 2016. Which is really surprising. It's one of the few states that Hillary Clinton won back in 2016 to trend in that direction. The exact margin, at least according to the Wikipedia final results, in the 2020 election was 2.39% for advantage for Joe Biden. In 2016, that margin was 2.42%. So while that seems very insignificant, I think it is actually a very big deal that the state of Nevada continues to trend more red since the 2008 election. The 2012 election of Senator Dean Heller seemed to have been a fluke, but however, the state overall is actually still trending more to the right. And a big indicator of that I mentioned in my earlier 2020 predictions was the fact that Nevada actually voted to the right of the nation in the 2018 midterms. Essentially one of the only blue states that in 2016 to actually do that. So that was actually a very big deal, I think anyway. So in 2020, the areas that trended more Republican, Clark County, the most populous county in Nevada. The city of Las Vegas is one of the fastest growing cities in the country. And by the looks of it, it doesn't really seem to be trending that dramatically Democratic. Usually fast-growing areas trend highly Democratic. But in the state of Nevada, that seems to be absent. In fact, it continues to trend more redder. And though some of the rural areas trended more Democratic, Washoe County being the other populated county that trended slightly more Democratic, I still think into the future Nevada is going to continue in this direction. And I actually think, and this is a bold prediction, but I actually think in the matchup between Josh Hawley and Kamala Harris, Josh Hawley would probably edge out a super narrow victory in the state of Nevada. Now, the main reason I say that, well, there's two. The trends I talked about before, and the fact that Republican support among Latinos has moved more to the right. However, my caveat is that it is only November 2020. It's about to be December, so this is highly speculative. But I would say, as of right now, I actually would favor Josh Hawley to win the state of Nevada in this hypothetical scenario. Moving on to the state of Arizona. Arizona voted Democratic for the first time since the 1996 election, with Bill Clinton winning the state narrowly over Bob Dole. Joe Biden has won the state by around 0.3% and really ran up the margins in places like Maricopa County, home to Phoenix, and Pima County, home to Tucson, the two most populous counties in the state, which both trended more Republican. Maricopa County, 5 points to the left. Pima County, 5 points to the left as well. Now, of course, the biggest thing about the 2020 election is the circumstance in which it happened in. We saw a variety of national crises happen during the 2020 election that really seemed to inhibit Donald Trump's ability to win the 2020 election. If you look at my earlier videos back from February, I actually favored Donald Trump to win the 2020 election, and I kept that all the way up until around, I think September is when I finally started giving the Biden the advantage, because the polls hadn't really shifted all that much. Turns out the polls were a lot of BS, but that is for another video. Arizona, while it went blue, I still think, again, we went from going plus 3.6 Republican to 0.3% Democrat. Now, of course, we have to look at the Democratic challenger as well, or in this case, the vice president, and how Kamala Harris is likely to be viewed. Arizona is still one of those states that if you have an R next to your name, you're likely to win the election. Of course, if that race becomes very nationalized, like with the Mark Kelly or the Donald Trump debate, I personally think I personally think Martha McSally and Donald Trump were bad Republican candidates for the state of Arizona. Josh Hawley, being more of a populist but more soft-spoken Republican, probably could flip the state back very narrowly, of course. I think that overall the trend for Arizona is to the left. I would say that I think that trend was slightly exacerbated a little bit in the 2020 election. Alaska we're not going to talk too much about. The reason I just don't have it as safe right now is because Alaska only went 10 points to Donald Trump. I don't really think it's going to be competitive because no one's really going to spend money in the state. So right now, I'll just put it as likely Josh Hawley. Very well could be safe. New Mexico, same thing. This was a state that trended a little bit more to the left, but not nearly as dramatically as other blue states. Again, areas that trended left were places near Albuquerque, Santa Fe, and most of rural New Mexico continued to trend more Republican. This went from plus 8 Democrat to, plus 10.3 or something like that, 10.2, 10.8 actually. So I still think this is probably going to stay. Oh, we didn't do that. Is probably going to stay in the likely category. Colorado and Virginia, I think, are going to be safe blue by the 2024 election. They just continue to trend dramatically more Democratic. Just looking at the suburbs of Colorado, some of these going double digits more Democratic than they did in 2016. And I don't see that trend slowing down anytime soon. Colorado really seems to be turning into more of a smaller Oregon or Washington state. It really does kind of have that West Coast kind of culture, even if it's in kind of the middle of the Great Plains Southwest area. So next we're going to talk about the state of Texas. In the 2020 election, Donald Trump won the state of Texas by 5.5 percentage points. Again, if we look at the areas that trended, we could see dramatic shifts to the right in the southern part of the state, particularly the border region, and the areas that trended more Democratic being the urban areas. Now, in the 2016 election, Donald Trump won the state of Texas by 9 points. Again, if we look at those trends from 2012, somewhat similar, but the border areas were kind of all over the place. Some of them still did trend red, though. Hidalgo County, we went from 70% Democrat in 2012 to now in the 2020 election, only 58% Democratic. I think this trend is very dramatic, and I think it is based on a variety of issues. I think mostly for Latino voters around the border, it's a lot of the cultural issues, and I think that's going to continue as it doesn't look like the Democratic Party is moving any more to the center on cultural issues. And I think the Republican ground game and outreach for Latinos has been improving because they've realized that Texas is a very important state. They literally cannot win a national election without the state of Texas. I think they're going to be putting a lot more resources into the state into the future. And I think Josh Hawley will overall perform better in the suburbs than somebody like Donald Trump, who tends to turn off suburban voters. So I think Josh Hawley's probably going to win the state of Texas by a similar margin, kind of slowing down the bluing trend. It could be a little bit more narrow, but again, it depends about the likability and effectiveness of Kamala Harris as a vice president. If you look at approval ratings, she is less approved of than Joe Biden. So I think that will end up hurting her on a national stage, especially next to somebody like Josh Hawley, who seems more, level-headed than Trump, even if their policies are very closely aligned. Unfortunately, not a lot of Americans vote on policy. They vote more on, the personality of the candidate, and I think that is a big mistake. Looking at Nebraska, Nebraska is going to be an interesting state to gauge because we're only looking at one district here. Nebraska's 2nd district trended dramatically to the left for Joe Biden. In the 2016 election, Donald Trump won Nebraska's 2nd district. I don't think it has the results here, but he won it by several points or so by a lean margin. This is going to be an interesting district as well because this is a very suburban district. However, if we go to the Nebraska Senate race, and I know Ben Sasse was going against a flawed candidate, but Nebraska's 2nd went pretty solidly Republican. Now, this is the district that in 2008 Barack Obama won, in 2012 Mitt Romney won it, and then in 2016 Trump won it. I think it's possible that this district flips back with Josh Hawley because of his outreach, his appeal to suburban voters in a way that Donald Trump didn't have. And I think he'd be able to hold rural areas. So I actually think Josh Hawley would win it, but it would be pretty narrow considering I don't really see the trends in the suburbs flipping that dramatically back. I do think suburbs will trend more Republican with Trump out of the picture, but I don't think it's going to be as dramatic as people think. I still think they're going to be a lot more friendly to Democrats than they were prior to the 2016 election. Minnesota could get really interesting because in 2016 we saw Minnesota get really close. Hillary Clinton only won the state of Minnesota by 1.5%. But of course, we look at the 2020 election and Joe Biden. Oh, we're looking at the Senate. If we look at the 2020 election, Joe Biden won the state by around 7 points, 7.1%. So winning Minnesota pretty handedly. He actually won it by a likely margin. Minnesota overall is, even though the rural areas are trending Republican, the urban and suburban areas are trending very dramatically Democratic. It's actually a pretty fast-growing part of the state. This part of the state's growing while the Iron Range, the red areas, are actually shrinking. So I think overall, the state of Minnesota is probably going to stay in Democratic hands, although I do think it'll be more contested with Donald Trump not on the ballot. Likewise, I think if we didn't have the economic downturn or the pandemic, I think Donald Trump would have performed better in Minnesota, but I don't think he would have won it. He probably would have lost it by around 4 or 5 points. So I still think Kamala Harris will win the state. I think Josh Hawley will probably put resources into Minnesota, but I don't think they'll play out for him. The state of Wisconsin is really going to be one of those states that decides the election. Again, I think Josh Hawley, as I mentioned in my GOP primary, I think he is the strongest candidate that Republicans can run that we know of right now, electorally speaking. Wisconsin was one of these really close states. It only went to Joe Biden by 0.6%, a narrower margin than it went to Trump in 2016. A far cry from the Minnesota we saw in 2008, which went to Barack Obama by 13 points. So the Rust Belt map has changed dramatically, and I don't think that is going to I think that's going to be the case in the 2024 election. I still think all of these states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, are going to be very, very close. Wisconsin was the reddest out of all these states, and I really do think Joe Biden was the Democrat to win Wisconsin. I think he did a good job of appealing to suburban voters in the WOW counties, which ultimately swung the state in his favor. In 2016, Donald Trump did a lot better in the WOW counties, mostly because Hillary Clinton did worse. Donald Trump only got 47% of the vote. Hillary only got 46.5%. This time around, we're looking at a situation where Joe Biden has 49% of the vote and Trump 48%. So it seems like in the 2016 flip of Wisconsin was mostly due to the fact that Hillary Clinton was more disliked than Donald Trump. I think similarly we could see a situation between Kamala Harris and Josh Hawley in this very case. I do think Josh Hawley has some strengths because he's more populist, economically speaking, at least in rhetoric, than other Republicans, and he puts a good face on it. So I think that will really play well in a state like Wisconsin, and I think he'll actually end up winning the state of Wisconsin against Kamala Harris. I don't think Kamala Harris will have the same appeal that Joe Biden did in the WOW counties. Plus, we're also looking at the fact that there is no Republican incumbent. Again, a lot of people have been critical of Trump's COVID response, as well as his response to protests and other events. So with that out of the picture, I think the Rust Belt will continue to trend more Republican. Republicans have a lot to gain in rural Wisconsin, and I actually think that's going to come to fruition in the 2024 elections. Another reason I say that is because, frankly, the 2020 election was supposed to be, all polls and all even the circumstances indicated a Joe Biden landslide. Now, I was one of the few people saying that wasn't going to happen. There were others. But that's not what happened, and Republicans did very well down ballot in the Senate and the House. So this was not the blue wave Democrats were anticipating, and I think 2024 will be the culmination of the 2020 trends in which the Rust Belt goes back into Republican hands. And I think Kamala Harris will perform a lot more poorly in places like Michigan and Pennsylvania. Ohio, we won't talk too much about. If we go to the 2020 election, Donald Trump essentially won Ohio by the same amount he won it in 2016. I don't think Ohio is rural enough to be safe red yet, like a state like Missouri, although it is possible. For now, I would put it probably in the likely column. The likely column for Josh Hawley, which is anywhere from 7 to 12 points. We'll head north to south here. We'll start off with the state of Maine. In 2020, Maine actually was a lot closer than polls indicated. The margin for Joe Biden was only around 8 points. The polling average had him up around 11. So the polls actually underestimated Donald Trump a fair amount. With that being said, though, Trump's rural gains in the 2nd Congressional District, I think this will still be replicated in the 2024 election. Kamala Harris is a different candidate than Joe Biden. She doesn't have the same kind of record or ties to the Obama administration as somebody like Joe Biden. Also, by regular voters, Joe Biden is viewed as more moderate than Kamala Harris, who by the general population is viewed as more left-wing. I think Josh Hawley will probably hold on to Maine's 2nd, like Donald Trump, by a lean margin. But Kamala Harris is probably still going to win the state of Maine by a likely margin. Could be a lean margin. In fact, I think it probably will be a lean margin. I think Josh Hawley will probably do better in the state of Maine than Donald Trump did. Donald Trump, the first time, got Maine down to 3 points, but I think, again, given the circumstances, there was kind of a Democratic backlash to Donald Trump. New Hampshire is a state that wasn't really that close this time around, but I think will be close in 2024. In 2016, New Hampshire came down to only around 2,000 votes, and Hillary Clinton won the state by 0.3%. So it was one of the closest states in the 2020 election, along with Michigan. Joe Biden was able to win and flip a lot of the counties that Donald Trump narrowly won in the 2016 election. And again, I think this is mostly due to Trump's tenure in office and the fact that I don't really think it was so much that Joe Biden was liked, but more that Donald Trump was very unpopular in the state. His unfavorables in New Hampshire were pretty high. They were in the double digits, and I think that is the reason why Donald Trump didn't do better in the state of New Hampshire. With that being said, though, I think Josh Hawley would perform better in the state of New Hampshire, but I still think Kamala Harris would probably win this state by around 2 or 3 points. Even though New England trended overall as a whole more Republican, I don't think the state of New Hampshire is going to flip Republican in 2024. I think it would take a little bit longer to actually flip red. So again, we're not going to talk about Virginia. That's going to be safe. We're going to move down to North Carolina. So in 2016, North Carolina went Republican by 3.6% with Donald Trump. This time around, Donald Trump almost got the same margin in the state, 49.9, but it was Joe Biden that improved massively, which goes to show you that it seems like North Carolina disliked Hillary more than they disliked Joe Biden. However, they still favored Republicans overall to win the state. Now, North Carolina is a very odd state because it splits its tickets a lot. Lieutenant governor seat went to Mark Robinson, a Republican, by 4 points. It went to Donald Trump, the Republican, by 1.3, and went to Governor Roy Cooper by around 4 points. So this is a state that's very much in contention. However, something I've noticed with the state of North Carolina, which is going to influence its call, is the fact that Republicans have yet to max out in these rural areas. Republicans continue to keep trending these northern rural counties more red, and even though the urban areas are getting bluer, it seems that the gains that Democrats have made in the western part of the state, I personally think they're going to go more Republican in the future, given the fact that I think Josh Hawley will probably do better with white voters than Trump did. Trump improved with all minority groups, but he failed to improve with white voters. He did much worse, and that was the reason why the losses in places like Virginia and Colorado were so dramatic. I do think Josh Hawley will win the state of North Carolina, but again, I think North Carolina is going to be like a Florida. It's going to be a very close state. It's going to tend to favor Republicans a bit more, but since I think Josh Hawley is a fairly strong Republican candidate, I think he could actually win the state of North Carolina, given his policies, again, versus Kamala Harris. Georgia is going to be one of those interesting states because this was a state that flipped blue for the first time since 1992. The last time a Democrat won it was Bill Clinton against George H.W. Bush. And he won this state by 0.25%. And the reason Joe Biden won this state wasn't necessarily minority turnout, though Asian and Latino turnout was up. Trump actually did better among those demographics. It was among white voters. I believe Joe Biden got 28% of the white vote, which in Georgia is very large. In comparison, Hillary Clinton got just 21% of the white vote. And if we look at the shifts from 2016, we see dramatic shifts in the Atlanta metro area, which is very, very suburban and growing very, very rapidly. Now, I think, like I said before, I think Josh Hawley is much more favored in the suburbs than somebody like Kamala Harris. I think suburban voters tend to vote for that type of Republican more, and his populist economic policies compared to other Republicans of the past would make him a better alternative than a Democratic alternative for those on the fence in these rural counties. So while I think some of these rural counties will trend back more Republican, I still think the suburbs are going to remain blue. However, I think Josh Hawley probably will, at least looking at it right now, and again, this is before the special election. I think if any of the Democrats wins the special election, I think Georgia probably would go blue. But for the sake of this video and what I know right now, I think Georgia is going to go red very narrowly. I think Josh Hawley would be able to win back the states that Trump lost and pick up the state of Nevada. But at the expense, of course, he wouldn't do as well in places like Minnesota and Maine as Trump did. Finally, we go to the state of Florida. In 2020, we saw Florida take a dramatic shift to the right, something almost no one saw coming. The Latino community, specifically Cubans, voted massively to the right compared to where they usually voted, and this offset the gains that Joe Biden has made in the suburban counties and even in the Panhandle, funny enough, which is really interesting. A lot of Florida counties didn't really trend that much differently than they did in the 2016 election. If we go to 2016, of course, Donald Trump won Florida by 1.2%, and again did a lot better in these counties as well. However, Miami-Dade trended more blue in the 2016 election. Donald Trump went from going 33.8 in Miami-Dade to 46.1, which is an astronomical shift. And I think, like I said, Republican outreach to Latinos has been getting better over the years as they're a rising demographic and they need to win the state. I really do think Josh Hawley probably will win Florida, barring a significant campaign event, and probably by around 2 to 3 points. Maybe not as well as Trump, but I think he would do fairly well in the state of Florida, given the fact that he will do better to appeal to both suburban and urban voters. And again, we didn't have things like COVID-19 and stuff. Hopefully that won't be an issue in 2024. But that is something that influences people's votes. I'd be curious to see what the margin in Florida would be like if that didn't happen. It could be as high as maybe 5 points, which would be really dramatic. But again, since Florida has an influx of older Northeast Republicans still offsetting, Black and Hispanic voters, again, Hispanic that are not Cuban, voting to the left in Florida and offsetting the urban vote, I think Florida is going to continue to stay a red state. It's always going to be a close state given the dynamics, but Florida will stay red. Georgia and Arizona will flip red. As for the state of Arizona, this is probably the last time Arizona will go red in a while unless Republicans are really able to reverse their trend in the state. And Josh Hawley will pick up the state of Nevada. I'm somewhat hesitant on that call, but I think I'm confident in it if the trends do continue and if Kamala Harris is the nominee. I think Kamala Harris, compared to Joe Biden, would do worse among white voters and suburban voters, and that's mainly why I have the state's margins where they are. So anyway, guys, thank you for watching this video. Please leave a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed. Hit the bell notification so you don't miss any more videos. Comment down below if you disagree or have anything to say about this video. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.